And I want to show you the ultimate ultra-conservative guy called Robert Barro, because his fantasy, and there's no better way to describe it, there probably is, but I'm in polite company, was what he called Ricardian equivalence. And this fantasy lies behind the austerity programs that you see built into the nature of the Maastricht Treaty and built into how the European Union is treating Greece and so on. He called it Ricardian equivalence. Now, one little guide, when anybody ever uses the name of a famous economist that has used one of their terms, well, I could use another impolite term. It's almost always bullshit. I will use that term. So he called this Ricardian equivalence based on the argument that you could find these propositions in David Ricardo. And in a couple of passages you can find Ricardo saying this and qualifying it later. But this is what he called the Ricardian approach to budget deficits, written back in 1989. And he just followed the logic here, because one of Keynes's wonderful statements in talking about, I believe, Hayek, was to talk about how one of Hayek's books shows what could happen when a fearsome logician working from false premises ends up in Bedlam. And that's what's going on here. So he said a deficit finance cut in current taxes leads to high future taxes. That's a proposition. Okay? Followed by a cut in taxes must, I've emphasised it, but that's in the text, must be matched by a corresponding increase in the present value of future taxes. Therefore, in other words, to drop taxes now, taxes must rise in the future. Equally, the same story about government spending. More government spending now means less spending in the future, or means more taxes in the future. Suppose, now one of my students once pointed out that when an economist says assume, what they actually mean is the word pretend. Suppose now that household demands for goods depends upon the expected present value of taxes. You're being led through a whole series of logical steps here. Okay? So we're now supposed to believe that your current consumption depends upon future expected taxes. Therefore, this is from false propositions to Bedlam. So the substitution of a budget deficit for current taxes has no impact on aggregate demand for goods. In other words, you can impose austerity and have no impact on current demand, because a current budget deficit leads to an offsetting increase in desired private savings. So if there's a budget deficit now, the public will instantly save in response to that. So the government spending increases because of the deficit, private spending falls because the private sector saves, no change in national saving, national demand. Okay. Now, if we assume, because people pointed out to him that he assumed you had infinite living individuals. And he said, oh, well, yes, okay, we don't have those, but if we assume that a network of intergenerational transfers makes the typical person part of an extended family that goes on indefinitely, okay, households capitalise the entire array of expected future taxes and therefore plan effectively with an infinite horizon. In other words, your spending today is based on what you think is going to happen to your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren's expenditure. Now, the reason that I wrote Debunking Economics, by the way, there's a second edition published in 2010, not quite as old as that and rather more updated, and I covered a fair bit of the economic issues after the financial crisis as well in that later edition. But this vision won't be found if you read the textbooks, because the textbooks writers, who generally speaking believe this same nonsense, but have better, again I'll use the French term, bullshit detectors, than the original authors like Samuelson and Barrow and so on, sanitise it. They write this stuff in various ways that seems more reasonable. Okay? They would not say that people plan for an infinite future. They'd say something else. We take into future expenditure, etc., to justify the same conclusion. You have to read the original articles to find this, and because it's bedded with mathematics, most people who are critics of the area don't even look at them. And that's a mistake, because you have to read the originals to know where this nonsense comes from. Now, what he's asserting, of course, is families plan for an infinite future. So if you have an increase in a government deficit today, pardon me, pressing the wrong button here, you necessarily, people save more to give bequests to their great-great-great-great-grandchildren. I'm not joking. That's effectively what the argument is. so that they can pay future taxes. So because you know future taxes are going to rise because of a deficit, you save to let your grandchildren pay those taxes off. It is sheer, absolute nonsense. You basically have to ask, what on earth was he smoking? You know? I think most of these people have studied at the University of Amsterdam.